according to Matthew, the 5th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Well, who is excited to dive into this gospel text today? Right, I knew something was fishy when I had 3 weeks off of preaching. And then came back to this. There is a lot to unpack here today, and I want to do that as faithfully and with as much care as I can, because we're dealing with mandates, with laws and commandments about things that have affected every single person in this house of worship. We're talking about anger and how to deal with our neighbors when we disagree. We're talking about adultery, we're talking about divorce, and we're talking about the power of the words that we speak with one another. And if those topics aren't enough to make us squirm, Jesus sprinkles a little hellfire in throughout this Sermon on the Mount too. There is a lot of law on the surface of this gospel today. But if we interpret this text together carefully and faithfully, I think we will get to the heart of this text where there is gospel and grace. So let's all take a deep breath together. Deep breath in and let it out. And we might do that a few times as we work our way through this. So let's start with talking about hell, shall we? Let's just go for it right out of the gate. We hear about hell 3 times in this text today. We've got, "You will be liable to the hell of fire" in verse 22. "Better to lose a limb than have your whole body thrown into hell" in verse 29. And then a repeat of that line again in verse 30. And the word that Jesus is using here that we have translated into the English word hell is the word Gehenna. Gehenna literally means Valley of Hinnom, which was a very real place just to the southwest of the city of Jerusalem. And Gehenna, the Valley of Hinnom, Gehenna was essentially Jerusalem's garbage dump. It's where the people would discard their trash, and there was a constant fire burning to incinerate the waste. So Gehenna is the place where garbage goes, and it's on fire. It gives a whole new meaning to one of my favorite modern phrases, wow, that's a real dumpster fire. So in this text, when we hear the word hell, Jesus is saying Gehenna, referring to a very real place full of what others have discarded. It stinks and it burns, and it's not a place you want to spend your time. Now, I'll note that in other places throughout Scripture, we see the words, when we translate into hell, the original Greek or Hebrew might be Hades or Sheol. And when that word is used, that's where we get our more traditional idea of a hellish place of judgment after we die. So do we see the difference there? But in today's text, in this gospel text, Jesus is intentionally calling forth the image of Gehenna, the image of trash and garbage, which would be familiar to his hearers. It's a hellishly smelly dumpster fire of a place where things are discarded outside the city of Jerusalem. So now that we've got that covered, let's try and figure out what Jesus is saying to the crowds and to us today. We're in Matthew 5, which is at the very beginning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Jesus started out with the Beatitudes, which we love, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And then we heard last week, he told us that we are the salt and the light of the earth. So we shouldn't lose our passion or our zeal for the Lord or hide the light that we shine. And Jesus is off to a pretty good start until he starts talking about the law. A lot about the law. And that's where we find ourselves in our text today. In today's gospel text, Jesus will hold up 3 of the 10 commandments. 3 laws out of the Decalogue, out of the 10. And then expound upon them in some unexpected ways. And it follows a rhetorical pattern that makes me think that Jesus was just settling into this sermon and he was getting into a rhythm. So he'll say, you have heard it said, insert commandment here, but I say to you. And then he'll go on. And so to us, it kind of sounds like Jesus is throwing out the 10 commandments, throwing out the law. But remember that in our text last week, he specifically said, do not think that I have come to abolish the law. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. Jesus is not, in fact, throwing out the commandments to not murder or commit adultery or swear by God's name. Rather, Jesus is holding up these familiar laws for us, and he's actually raising the bar even higher. Now, in order to see this, I invite you to look at the gospel reading in front of you, and let's look at this pattern. You have heard it said, but I say to you. And when we see this pattern, I want you to mentally change the word but to furthermore. You have heard it said, furthermore, I say to you. And before anyone asks, yes, I did brush off my Greek New Testament. And this is an accurate translation of the article de, which can mean but, or rather, or but also, furthermore. So let's put this translation into practice if you're looking at this week's text. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. Furthermore, I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So Jesus holds up for us the 5th commandment, you shall not murder. And then he goes on, furthermore, do not become so angry with your sibling or neighbor that you insult them and call them names. Jesus is saying, not murdering your neighbor is kind of the bare minimum, guys. But not only should you not physically kill your neighbor, you also shouldn't hurl insults and slurs at those with whom you are angry or have disagreement. Someone alert the media. Jesus is saying that we damage our relationships with our neighbors in so many ways that are beyond the physical. When we lash out in anger, and we yell obscenities or insults at one another, when we call each other fools and idiots, And where does that angry, death-dealing language and name-calling belong? Gehenna, in the trash. And then Jesus invites us to sincerely consider where we stand with our neighbors and our communities before we come to God in our prayer and worship. There is a reason that we pass the peace with one another before we come up for communion, and it comes from this text. Because we are meant to reconcile with our neighbors, with our communities, to extend peace before we come to God's table. All right, let's take one of those deep breaths. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Because Jesus goes on. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. Furthermore, I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. Now this time, Jesus holds up for us the sixth commandment. You shall not commit adultery. You should not betray your spouse or the commitments you have made to them. Furthermore, do not objectify others for your own amusement or gratification or lust. If your eye causes you to sin, you should tear it out. If your hand causes you to sin, you should cut it off, because it's better for you to lose a limb than to treat people like they are objects, or like they are simply there for your pleasure and use and disposal. Note, by the way, that Jesus does not say, if a woman or other person causes you to sin. Jesus does not say, if their revealing wardrobe causes you to sin. Jesus does not say, if their level of intoxication causes you to sin. Jesus does not say, if their mixed signals cause you to sin. No, Jesus says, if your eye, if your hand, if your actions cause you to sin, if you cause you to sin. And then he says, it's better for you to lose a limb, not literally, but it is better for you to be uncomfortable or unfulfilled than to objectify or to take advantage of another person. And as for the kind of behavior where one does objectify another, or where one touches another without consent, where does that kind of behavior belong? Gehenna. In the garbage, because objectifying or taking physical advantage of other people is trash, right? It's not behavior that Jesus wants from us. Now, on the subject of intimacy and relationship, Jesus takes a little detour here. You know how preachers sometimes get on a roll and then they go off on a tangent and you look at your watch and wonder how long you're going to be there? Jesus is doing that, and he says, speaking of adultery and right relationships, let's talk about divorce for a minute. And he goes on to say that divorce should only happen if there has been some kind of betrayal or falsehood on the woman's part. And it's important to know the context here, because the context is very different from our current one. In Jesus' world, only a man could get a divorce. And because women had very little social power or capital in a first century context, if a man divorced his wife, she would essentially be left destitute, with no financial resources of her own and often no family to return to. And Jesus was responding to what he was seeing in his community all around him. Men divorcing their wives on a whim because the dinner was burned, or he suddenly found her laugh annoying, or because he saw someone cuter walking down the road that day. And this would leave many women homeless, destitute, and with no way to recover socially or financially. So Jesus uses this moment to clarify and essentially say, hey, divorce isn't just something that you do because you feel like it. And as a church, we firmly believe that. We take the vows of marriage very seriously. Divorce is not something to be taken lightly or to be done on a whim. But I want to state clearly that we know that divorce is sometimes the best and most life-giving option for people. This applies especially to cases of physical and emotional abuse and to partners who have exhausted every possibility of reconciliation. God desires our wholeness and our healing and our health, and sometimes those things are not attainable in unhealthy or unsafe or unstable relationships. And it needs to be said because this text and others like it have been traditionally used to shame people into staying in marriages that are not safe or are not healthy. So on that note, let's take another deep breath. Deep breath in, let it out. Now after Jesus takes this detour, he returns to his pattern and he holds up now a mix of the second and the eighth commandments. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. Furthermore, I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven or by earth or by Jerusalem. Let your word be yes or no." Jesus holds up a hybrid of a few commandments. Don't take the Lord's name in vain, don't lie, don't bear false witness against your neighbor. And says, furthermore, I say to you, recognize how powerful your words are and make sure that you mean what you say. Let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Don't say that you stand for one thing and then do the opposite. Don't commit yourself to something and then go back on it. Don't swear up and down that you are a follower of Christ and then ignore all the things that Christ tells you to do. Mean what you say and back it up with your actions, because the Jesus movement is all about action and living out what we preach. So there we have it. Jesus hitting us with a lot of law this week. And not only that, but doubling down on the law and then adding new commandments on top of existing ones. It's enough to make anyone uncomfortable, and it's a gospel text that might leave us scratching our heads and wondering where the good news really is. But I see a lot of good news in today's text. I see a lot of good news in the laws that Jesus is laying out for us today, because I think it is really good news that Jesus holds us to a higher standard. Jesus doubles down on and adds to these commandments because he truly believes that we are capable of living lives full of grace and truth and good relationships. This text is telling us that Jesus has faith in us and our ability to live with one another peacefully and justly. And so he challenges us. He pushes us. He stretches us for our own growth and learning. He encourages us to not settle for the bare minimum, but to live into the grace of the gospel fully and wholeheartedly to the best of our ability. Thank God for a Savior who encourages us to give the best of ourselves to this world and to one another. Because that's grace. And it's not cheap grace. It is tenacious grace. It is fierce grace. It is grace that invites us into right relationship with God and with one another. And we will fail. Again and again, we will fail to live up to the high bar that Christ has set, and there's good news in that too. Because when we fail, we know that Christ is there to intercede for us. We know that Christ is there to forgive us, to advocate for us, to empower us, and to help us try again to get it right. Because Jesus' grace covers our sin. Amen?
Amen.
Jesus' grace covers our failure. Amen?
Amen.
Jesus' grace covers our lives and empowers us to keep going and to keep trying again. That is good news. That is some of the best news. Perhaps the news that we need this day. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.